Yes, hello. It's October 1st. Do you know what that means? It's Spooky Lake Month. We're doing 31 days of spooky hydrology, starting with the infamous Crater Lake. Specifically, I want to talk about Old Man of the Lake, a hemlock trunk that has been floating around Crater Lake since at least 1896. This phantom tree stump has mystified scientists for over 100 years, and it's still unexplained. There's about 4 feet of bleached stump above the water, and it's buoyant enough to hold a human form. But what might be even more spooky is that there's some 30 feet more to this stump beneath the water. Carbon dating has revealed that the stump itself is over 450 years old. This is the earliest photograph we have of it. In the early 1900s, they decided to track the movement of the Old Man of the Lake. They discovered that the stump can float over 60 miles in just 4 months. One theory for why this stump remains perpetually vertical is that early on there may have been rocks housed in the roots weighing it down. Over time, the top of the stump may have dried out in such a way that it keeps this tree balanced and afloat in this eerie equilibrium. But this is just a theory. Scientists don't really know for sure. Either way, it's a natural phenomenon. The lower half of the stump beneath the water is covered in a type of moss that can only be found at the bottom of Crater Lake. And as many of you know, this is a very deep lake. It was created over 7,700 years ago by an enormous volcanic eruption. At over 1,900 feet deep, we've only explored a small portion of the lake bottom. But what we did find was extra spooky. This is not rock. The tunnels you see here are made from layered peat moss. Some of the moss at the bottom is over 2,300 years old. And scientists don't really know why these tunnels form. But it's the same moss that can be found on Old Man of the Lake. 8 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake time. Blood Falls is a natural phenomenon that's unlike anything else on the planet. Located in the dry valleys of Antarctica, one of the only places on the continent not completely covered in ice. It hasn't rained in this region for 2 million years. So this is where you can find Blood Falls on the edge of the Taylor Glacier. This bloody red water is 3 times saltier than the ocean, and it's emerging from a lake that's trapped beneath the glacier. This completely baffled scientists for over 100 years, and it's only recently that we've begun to understand it. The water in this subglacial lake got trapped here and isolated some 3 million years ago. So Blood Falls is a time capsule. Over time, the water in this lake became extremely salty, which means it freezes at a much lower temperature than fresh water. Because of that, it releases heat while it's freezing, allowing water to flow. But that still doesn't explain why it looks like someone stabbed the glacier. The secret is iron. As this iron-rich brine comes in contact with the oxygen in the air, the iron becomes rust, which gives it this spooky, bloody effect. There's also a thriving bacterial community beneath the ice that contributes to this, which is why Blood Falls could give us clues to how life could survive in extreme environments on other planets. 5 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake time again. We're doing a month of haunted hydrology, and today I want to talk about Spirit Lake in Washington. This lake is located right next to Mount St. Helens. The lake went through a violent transformation after the eruption in 1980. Prior to the eruption, Spirit Lake was a popular tourist destination. Scientists tried to give early warnings about the eruption because of a bulge that appeared on the side of the volcano. And then the actual eruption was a little bit strange. Instead of having the ash go straight up into the air, the entire side of the volcano exploded in a 5.1 magnitude eruption. The first thing that happened was the largest landslide in recorded human history, part of which barreled straight into Spirit Lake. This resulted in a 600-foot megawave on the lake, also raising the waters by over 200 feet. One victim of this landslide is a man named Harry Truman, who, despite warnings, refused to leave his lodge and is now buried beneath the waters of Spirit Lake. With the eruption, a wall of superheated volcanic gases and searing rock flattened the surrounding landscape. It's estimated that over 1 million trees were instantly destroyed. The tsunami-like wave from Spirit Lake sucked these trees down into the water, resulting in a wasteland that's choked with thousands of trees and volcanic debris. The trees are still there today, 40 years later, creating a log mat on the surface. Because of gases from the volcano, the lake was completely toxic for years after this event. For scientific study, there's now 200 square miles of protected land near Mount St. Helens. The landscape has remained untouched, something of a graveyard for the 57 people who died here. 7 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake time. We're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and today I want to look at Dead Horse Bay. Located on the southeast shore of Brooklyn, Dead Horse Bay is on the coast of Barren Island. This sandy spit of land has a dark and conspicuous history. It's tied to the story of New York City in the 1800s. It was the largest city on the East Coast, and it was only getting bigger. Because the best form of transportation was horse-drawn carriage, there were millions of horses in New York. But this also meant that horses were dying here, and the city didn't have a plan for their carcasses. This is how Barren Island became a dumping ground for dead animals. Each day, carcasses would be piled on a boat where they would be taken to Barren Island's nuisance factories. These types of factories would take animal remains and boil them in acid to create profitable products. Items such as candles, glue, soap, and grease, while the bones would be made into buttons. Any extra animal remains would be thrown into the nearby bay, which is how it got its name, Dead Horse Bay. This type of factory processing also produced noxious gases and a stench. Talking about the type of terrible smell that's almost inconceivable by modern standards, and it permeated the community, their skin, and their clothes. The end of Barren Island came with the invention of the automobile. This rendered the factories obsolete, and it became an airfield before eventually becoming protected land. Today, the beach has a reputation for its amazing trash and treasures, amongst which you can still find horse bones and teeth. This is probably the closest you're gonna get to mudlarking on the Thames. 6 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month. We're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and you can't do that without talking about cave diving. There's an especially spooky cave diving location in Australia. It's called The Shaft, and it can be found in a cow field. This is a very strange diving site, and that's because the entrance is this hole in the ground. The shaft was discovered in 1938 by an unsuspecting farmer. The farmer was shocked to realize that the hole in the ground led to an enormous cavern filled with water. He had stumbled across something that would fascinate cave divers for the next 70 years. The initial cavern is 120 feet deep, but 2 separate passages reach beyond 275 feet. The 2 separate passages take you to deep and treacherous tunnels. And unfortunately, over 16 people have died while cave diving here. The most deadly day at the shaft was in 1973 when 8 divers went into the cavern and only 4 returned. It's believed that the divers experienced confusion after kicking up silt in one of these treacherous tunnels. If divers kick up a cloud of silt in a cave like this, they won't be able to see, and it's easy to lose their sense of direction. Combined with panic, divers also can experience something called nitrogen narcosis. It's also called depth intoxication because it mimics the feelings of being drunk, which leads to divers being disoriented. Divers have been known to become so confused that some even remove their mouthpiece and breathe water. Weeks later, they were able to return to retrieve the bodies of the divers, 2 of which were held in a tight embrace in death. Would you go down the shaft? 8 out of 10 spookies. Spooky lakes. Spooky lakes. We're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and today I want to talk about a shipwreck in Lake Superior. And no, I don't mean the Edmund Fitzgerald. I do have a video on this in my Great Lakes playlist. Instead, I want to look at the shipwreck of the SS Kamloops. First, we have to appreciate how terrifying Lake Superior is. It's the largest freshwater lake by surface area, and it holds 10% of the planet's available freshwater. Waves in a storm here have been recorded up to 30 feet, and the lake has swallowed more than 350 shipping vessels. And it's estimated that some 10,000 people have died in Lake Superior. The lake also has a reputation for never giving up its dead. and the SS Kamloops is no exception. In December of 1927, the steel freighter was caught in a blizzard with wind up to 30 miles per hour and freezing temperatures. 5 other ships also went down that day, and the last of the Kamloops was seen, it was completely covered in ice. It wasn't until 6 months later that bodies began to wash ashore at Isle Royale. The location of the ship was a mystery, and it was presumed that all 22 crew members had died. The only other trace of the ship was an actual message in the bottle from a stewardess named Alice. It said something along the lines of, "I am the last one left alive, freezing and starving on Isle Royale. I just want my parents to know my fate." It wasn't until 50 years later that they discovered the site of the wreck. Due to the cold and lack of bacteria, the ship and its cargo were in excellent condition. While some of Lake Superior's shipwrecks are off limits because they're considered graveyards, the Kamloops is a popular diving site. However, the ship's goods were not the only thing preserved here in the cold water. Old Whitey might be the most famous corpse in the Great Lakes, and he floats around in the engine room of the Kamloops. The skin is white like that because of a chemical reaction called adipocere, also known as corpse wax. This phenomenon turns human skin into a hard casing like soap. That's how Old Whitey and other Lake Superior dead have been preserved for over 100 years in the cold water. I don't know about you, but I find these shipwreck graveyards to both be terrifying and comforting. 10 out of 10 spookies. Also, I have to shout out the queen, Ask a Mortician. You should watch her video on YouTube. It's much more in-depth. Yes, hello. It's Spooky Lake Month. We're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and today I want to talk about the abandoned sea forts in the Thames estuary. I had actually never heard of these before I did my video on the River Thames extinction. The Thames estuary is where the River Thames meets the North Sea in the southeast of Great Britain. Prior to their construction, enemy air raids would use the Thames estuary and river as a runway to get to London. And after the Blitz bombing in 1940, where there was 76 consecutive nights of bombing in London, something had to be done. Designed by civil engineer Guy Munsell, these sea forts were considered a risky move when they were first proposed. However, at this point, over 200 soldiers had died defending the estuary from these air raids. So Britain went ahead and built these 7 sea forts in 1942. 1 command tower, 5 artillery towers, and a tower with a powerful searchlight. For the next 7 years, these were active Navy fortresses defending against enemy aircrafts. Men would spend 36-day shifts living and working on the sea forts. They could move between the different towers on walkways, most of which no longer exist today. Initially, this may have seemed like something of a gamble for the British government, but it was worth it because this route became almost entirely too dangerous for enemy forces. These sea forts eliminated 30 V-1 rockets, 22 enemy aircrafts, and 1 enemy boat. Today they stand as abandoned husks, but they're a reminder to us of the darkest days of World War II. Before they eventually crumble into the sea, I think they deserve 5 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month, where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and today we have to talk about Alaskan earthquakes that result in monster tsunamis. I am not exaggerating, the largest tsunami in recorded human history occurred here in 1958. An earthquake here triggered a rock slide which resulted in a wave that was over 1,700 feet high. Witnesses who saw the wave coming towards them said it looked like a black, muddy wall of water full of rocks and trees. Then, just 6 years later, we get the largest earthquake in US history. And we just need to appreciate for a second that Alaska experiences an average of 100 earthquakes every day. If you were to make a list of the worst earthquakes in the last 500 years, most of them would be in Alaska. However, the 1964 earthquake was the worst, coming in at a 9.2 magnitude. Over 600 miles of this fault line moved a total of 60 feet in 4.5 minutes. This earthquake released about 500 years of stress buildup on this fault line, where the Pacific plate subducts underneath the North American plate. The earthquake also caused an underwater landslide, which resulted in a tidal wave or tsunami that was felt in over 20 countries around the world. The tsunami was felt all the way to New Zealand, and unfortunately it killed multiple people along the west coast of North America, including 4 children that were playing along an Oregon beach. The earthquake and the subsequent tsunami completely altered the landscape in Alaska, including wiping towns off the map. But I think what makes this even more spooky is that we're just waiting for it to happen again. And that's because melting glaciers in Alaska are just increasing the risk of landslides and therefore tsunamis. 6 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month. We're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and today I want to talk about Lake Chelan. Located in Washington, this lake is nestled amongst the Cascade Mountains, and it's the 3rd deepest lake in the United States. Just the shape of this lake kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies. It's over 50 miles long, and it's deeper than Lake Superior. Just to appreciate this depth, at its deepest point, it's over 388 feet below sea level. Scientists believe that Lake Chelan was formed during our last ice age when a continental ice sheet sat on top of North America. Specifically over this lake, the glacier may have been up to 5,000 feet thick. And extremely deep lakes that are also very cold have a tendency to hold on to their dead. Which brings us to a tragedy that occurred here in 1945. On November 26th in 1945, a school bus carrying 20 young students and 2 adults plunged into Lake Chelan. According to eyewitnesses and survivors from the accident, the bus driver was driving very slowly during a sudden and unexpected snowstorm. But unfortunately, the bus hit a slippery spot and rolled twice before ending up in the water of the lake. At first, about half of the bus was protruding out of the water, so 5 students and an adult were able to escape through a broken window and swim ashore. But before the rest could escape, the bus was swallowed by the lake. By the time help arrived, the bus was completely submerged. They would end up finding 2 more bodies along the shore of Lake Chelan. However, it would take a week of searching to find the bus, since diving technology at the time was not advanced. Eventually, it was discovered more than 200 feet down, precariously perched on a ledge. The ledge overlooked a 1,400-foot drop to the rest of the lake, and the bus would have never been recovered. They embarked on the very difficult task of pulling the bus out of the water, where they found 4 more students and the bus driver. However, 9 more bodies were never recovered, and they'll remain forever at the bottom of Lake Chelan. The lake would never forget, and it's still to this day the worst school-related accident in Washington state history. While the story is tragic and terrible, the lake itself deserves 7 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month, where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and today we have to talk about the absolute horror that is the Niagara Falls Ice Bridge. There are so many spooky stories that I could do about the Niagara Falls, considering that some 5,000 people have died here in recent history, including all of the human remains that they found at the base of the American Niagara Falls when they turned it off in 1969. But we're here to talk about the 3 people that died on February 4th, 1912, when an ice bridge collapsed and swept them downstream. It's kind of hard to believe today, but it was commonplace in the late 1800s and early 1900s for people to walk on the ice below the Niagara Falls. The ice in this bridge that spanned between Canada and the United States could be up to 8 feet thick, which is why people had a tendency to trust it. Hundreds of people would come to visit this natural phenomenon, where savvy businessmen would set up shacks on the ice selling food and refreshments. People would go sledding and have snowball fights. But this all changed on a single day in February in 1912, when 35 people were out on the ice bridge, which spanned from shore to shore. Suddenly and without warning, the ice cracked beneath their feet, and people scrambled, terrified to get to either of the shores. Unfortunately, 4 people remained on the ice as rivers of water began to appear between the cracks. 2 young men by the name of Burl and Ignatius were trapped on the ice as it began to separate from the shoreline. Ignatius made a fast decision, jumping directly into the freezing water, where he swam ashore to be rescued. However, Burl turned back because he heard the cries of Clara and Eldridge Stanton, who remained on the ice. This heroic act would cost Burl his life, as the 3 of them became trapped on an iceberg that quickly moved down the river. The first hour is fairly calm while they drift down on their ice raft, but eventually they're going to reach rapids and then the Niagara Whirlpool. At the second bridge before the rapids, they were able to get a rope down to Burl, where he caught it and had a hold on it, but he was dragged through the water and lost his grip. He dropped beneath the surface and was never seen again. Despite rescue efforts, Clara and Eldridge gave up and held each other on their ice raft before disappearing into the rapids. No bodies were ever recovered, and the ice bridge was permanently closed. This This is definitely haunted hydrology, 9 out of 10 spookies. Fascinating Horror on YouTube did a great video on this, and while you're there, check out the rest of their awesome content. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month. We're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. And today we're going to talk about how they turned off the Niagara Falls for 6 months in 1969. I recognize that this is weird terminology, but that's what the media has always used to talk about this event. It's also sometimes referred to as dewatering, which is also strange. What really happened here was they built a coffer dam which diverted the water to the Horseshoe Falls. Terminology aside, the Army Corps of Engineers decided to do this for a multitude of reasons. The Niagara Falls are constantly eroding, which means they're still, to this day, moving back around 4.5 feet every year. With that erosion comes rock slides, as you can see from this footage from the early 1900s. So in 1969, they wanted to check for destabilization as well as the status of the erosion. However, they were also interested in removing boulders for cosmetic reasons. To divert the water, they used 28,000 tons of rock. Hundreds of people came to witness them turning off this enormous waterfall. But what is it about this event that's spooky and a little unnerving? Since the early 1900s, some 5,000 people have died at the Niagara Falls that we know of, and in fact, 30 to 60 people still die here every year. The majority of those deaths were suicides. However, there's also a long history of daredevils who have attempted to survive the falls. From wooden barrels to bubbles, only 16 people in modern history have survived this drop. However, it's less common today because it's illegal and you could be fined up to $25,000. So when they turned off the American Falls, they found evidence of this deadly history. Historians were actually surprised because only 2 bodies were found at the base of the falls. However, they also found millions of coins. There are plans to do this again in the near future to repair bridges. And who knows what they'll find at the base of the falls this time. 4 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month. We're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and today I want to talk about the Rio Tinto River in Spain. This river is located in the mountainous region of Andalusia. For over 2,000 years, humans have been extracting metals from the ground here. And that's because there's a 350 million year old pyrite belt that was deposited here. It's the largest concentration of massive sulfides in the world. So the fantastic colors of the Rio Tinto might be somewhat natural due to bacteria turning sulfur into sulfuric acid and iron oxide. However, mining has greatly exacerbated the condition and contributed to the degradation of the region's environment. Today, the river is extremely acidic with high levels of iron and other heavy metals. The Rio Tinto is like a 5,000-year-old wound on this earth that is unable to cauterize, and it's all because of mining in this region. And I'm not gonna lie, the mining history here is absolutely fascinating. It started thousands of years ago with the indigenous population. Then Rome came to Spain with their advanced technologies and they minted some of their very first gold and silver coins here. In fact, 2,000 years later, they found a Roman water wheel that they used for mining here. But after the Roman Empire collapsed, the mine sat dormant until the 1700s. And this is really when they began to take the production to an unprecedented level. However, at this point, it was having an unchecked impact on the environment because they were using a process called open-air calcination. This process meant destroying all of the trees in the region as well as producing noxious clouds of sulfuric gases. Over 600 tons of toxic gases were entering the atmosphere, resulting in acid rain across the region, which led to the first ever environmental strike in Spain in 1888, where the mining company opened fire on the crowd of protesters. So the bloody red color of this river truly reflects the dark history here. There's no visible signs of life in this toxic river. However, there's a large population of extremophiles, which are types of organisms that can live in extreme environments that give us clues to how life might live on other planets. So the Rio Tinto gets 7 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month. We're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and on that note, I want to talk about a lava lake. At any given time, there's only about...
You know, it just occurred to me that I was so focused on this project that I haven't even said a word yet. But I think I'll give you guys a little bit of a summary of what this project is. I have a banner that I got from a thrift store that says Boo on it, so each letter gets its own little flag shape. But unfortunately, it has certainly seen better days, so I decided to, instead of try to save that one, it's a very basic one, I decided to redesign my own. So I spent a few days trying to figure out what I even wanted on these. The original only has the letters and a few like swirls. I keep looking over at it. A few swirls around those letters. But I tend to be a little bit extra, so I wanted to do the letters but have some illustrations in there. But it was a little bit of a challenge to try to figure out a design that wasn't going to overshadow the letters. That is always kind of the struggle. You want to put so much detail into things, but then you have to kind of question what is the real focus of this. So that took a little bit. So I'm currently working on the bee. Let's see if I can give you guys a little bit of a look at it. So I've of course stretched it in a hoop so that I don't make my hand issues any worse trying to create tension. But you can see the beginning of the bee, the first hoop and the second hoop. And here's the top of a pumpkin, and there will be a second pumpkin over here. I've designed the other two, the double O's, but as you can see, I stitch the design first. So that first O is in the middle of that stitch phase, and I didn't really think I should put it on a stream considering that it's the same color as the background. It's not a whole lot to look at. But I have been doing this embroidery in general at this point. Oh my god, has it been 2 years? I think it has been about 2 years. My mom always did a lot of cross stitch, but I never really took to it because all of the templates were, you know, backgrounds or flower gardens or just things that I wasn't particularly interested in, so I never really took to it, even though I am at my core a hobbyist. However, I did find a way to be able to design my own, and I have been kind of experimenting with it ever since. Just been kind of messing around with how to stitch. For a while, I was only stitching in a single direction, almost like cross hatching style or hatching style at that point if you're only going one direction. But I don't know, I kind of got tired of that, and then I realized that I could make it more dynamic to look at if I actually directionally went in a certain direction. So this, I will be curving all of the lines to curve for the moon. For a while, I really looked up no tutorials at all, not even a little bit. I just kind of wanted to see what I could figure out on my own. I keep hitting my little pumpkin here, poor thing. You know what, maybe I'll move him over here out of my range of fire. Oh, well, he's hidden by the video, but that's okay. I'll talk about that in a minute. But so for a while I was just kind of going about my day, but I mentioned to a friend about the embroidery and she's like, wait, are you using this 6-ply thread? And I was like, well, yeah. And she's like, you're not taking it apart into thread? I was like, wow, that didn't even occur to me. So I recently started messing with what things could look like if I did separate the thread a little bit, and shockingly I was able to do a whole lot more detail when I split the thread at least into 3, because each big strand is 6, so this is a 3. You saw me do that at the beginning where I separated it into 2 groups of 3. So now I'm able to, especially I was making a lot of things like hats or bags for people, doing embroidery for that, and it's a little hard to get really good detail work or good points and corners if you're using such a broad stroke, so to speak. So I have started doing this. I think I'm in the middle of 4 different embroidery projects, but I use those as a break from working on a spooky mystery show that I do. So right now, of course, we are in the thick of spooky season. So I currently have 5 episodes out at the moment, and there is, I believe, another 3 on the docket right now. Most of my day-to-day was spent writing, collecting a little bit more research, but finishing up my writing for this Friday's episode. Yeah, I feel like I've been losing steam with this recent episode. It's a lot. It's the audio editing that really kind of gets to me. The audio editing takes days, because I listen through every second, every minute, every hard S sound, every plosive. I edit all of those out myself. So it tends to take a few days to get through it once, and then I have to do the final listen through to make sure that nothing kind of slipped in, and to make sure that the pacing of my words is right. Because sometimes when I hit a spot that I know way more about, I will speak a little bit faster, or you don't realize you turned away from the mic a little bit. So you have to kind of mess around with that volume intensity. And then this past weekend, I gave a short presentation to friends about weird and potentially hilarious cryptids. So I lost a few days working on that. Totally worth it. But I think I might turn that into an unofficial episode. I'd like to do some video stuff. Just really haven't had the ability to, with how much research, editing, and trying to spread word of it. This is our 3rd season, and I say "our" very loosely, because it's usually just me working on this stuff, so it's my 3rd season. But it's putting anything creative out here at the moment is so... You're just kind of throwing your stuff into a whirlpool that just kind of gets sucked down with everyone else trying to make an impact. So not a whole lot of people really know that it exists. Of course, I'd like to change that, but that's going to take some time. And I don't use AI for anything, not for research. I read all of the articles. I don't use the AI summary. I hate it. I hate how much they keep trying to get me to use it. I don't use it for a first listen through. I don't use it for writing any of it. So it takes a long time, but if I put something out that people like, I want it to be because I made it good. I made it something that was worth having out there in the world that other people appreciated. So, with that being said, actually, of course I have in the corner what we're watching right now, and that is Spooky Lake Month by Geo. So I believe this is her 2021 playlist. And my show actually started with what was it? It was Lake Lanier. My first episode was Lake Lanier, and then her video had popped up when I was kind of on the fence about whether or not I actually wanted to pull the trigger and do the project, and it kind of pushed me over the edge to do it. So, of course, I love all the videos, but that really kind of got me to actually commit to it. Now, if you look online, if you look on the show's playlist or website, you won't be able to find Lake Lanier. That's because as time went on, I started to create a standard at which I wanted to work. A standard of how many sources, where those come from, a standard of even my audio editing. And that didn't exist for the first episode since it was so new. Of course, you just kind of try something to get it out there. So as time went on, you'd hear a story here or there, or someone from the area would say something, and I made an update episode for the first season, but eventually I found so much information that I had not found previously that it no longer felt ethically right to keep that first episode live until I went in and added the appropriate information. I didn't really get anything wrong per se, maybe some of the minor details, but in general, so much of the cultural context of the horrible things that happened in the area I had missed, and so that felt kind of disingenuous to keep that live, but to not have the appropriate information. So I decided to take it down for now. Of course, I don't really have the time right now to work on it, but I hope that when I finish this season, I will be able to go back to that and work on it and actually release it with the attention to detail that it deserves to have. So, yeah, at the moment, I've got a lot of directions I want to go with the show, and a lot of topics. I've done a few trips, had a few suggestions. I try not to think too far into the future, but I've done a lot of recording, so hopefully I can actually make it into a video series. So that would be exciting. So I decided to put on Geo's stuff while I kind of collected myself for a minute. But yeah, I guess I'll get back to playing this and actually throw my own thoughts on top of some of these, because I have done a fair amount of research on quite a few of these topics. So, you know what, let's just see what else is in the 2021 playlist.
I want to talk about a lava lake. At any given time, there's only about 5 to 7 active lava lakes on the planet. And one of the largest lava lakes in the world exists inside of the Nyiragonga volcano, which resides in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in the African Rift Valley. This is where the African continent is being ripped apart, which makes it so volcanically active. And the Nyiragonga volcano is often cited as the most dangerous in all of Africa. I don't think the pictures really do it justice until you zoom away from this little man standing on the edge of the lava lake and you realize just how enormous it is. The lava here is unusually fluid, so while lava is rarely dangerous to humans, this lava can travel at 60 miles per hour. That's why I argue that the Nyiragonga lava is the closest to the lava at Mount Doom, where Gollum just sinks directly into it, which wouldn't normally happen at a lava lake. Most lava lakes are dense enough that your body would rest on top while you burned alive. Another thing that makes this volcano exceptionally dangerous is the sheer amount of toxic gas it releases, including carbon dioxide, which suffocates you silently. They began recording eruptions here in 1882. Since then, it's erupted 34 times. It's suspected that the lava lake has existed throughout history, but it was only confirmed in 1948. The most recent eruptions were in 1977, 2002, and May of this year. Lava from the eruption has destroyed hundreds of homes, while 30 people still remain missing. However, in addition to the direct threat of a volcanic eruption, scientists are heavily concerned about Lake Kivu. And that's because Lake Kivu is one of only 3 lakes in the world that explodes. It's called a limnic eruption, where the lake releases carbon dioxide gas that could kill the 2 million people that live in this area. But that's a story for another day. The lava lake gets 5 out of 10 spookies.
I actually had an interesting thought. Though also funny enough that she says that, oh, this lake's another story with limnic eruptions. I think this week she just released a video about that specific eruption of what she's talking about. So I would go look over at her stuff to see her most recent video about it. However, this season 3 that I've been working on is focused on urban legends. And so I had so many urban legends that I really had to narrow it down for. I'm pretty ambitious, but I had some friends kind of begging me to go a little bit easier and to save some, which is, it's kind of fair. I want to be able to have as much research as I can for all these topics, especially academic papers or interviews, and you kind of have to have the time to be able to do that. So I have a whole list of stories that I kind of had to put on the back burner that I'm going to have to get back to later. I've kind of debated whether or not that should be the next season, but I don't know if people at large really want 2 seasons in a row of an urban legend season, because I only release a new season for September through October and maybe a few specials throughout the year. So it would be a whole another year until the next season, and I don't know if people would really want to wait for the next season and have it still be more urban legends. I might have to give people a break for a year to go to another location or another concept or phenomena. I have a whole spreadsheet of those. I might have to give them a little bit of a break. So the reason I stopped to talk about this one is that looking at those photos and those videos of that eruption of that lake, I remember that one of the urban legends that I pressed pause on is actually the Hole to Hell. It's an urban legend about, it really was making its rounds online in, I think, the 2010s. And so it was a general legend that essentially the scientists dug too deep. I believe that some stories say it was specifically in Siberia, that they dug too deep and that they thought they heard something weird when they approached the borehole, which digs way down into the earth. They said, I think I hear something. And they lowered a mic into the earth, and before it, burned up and melted up, they claimed that they could hear the screams and cries of the damned. Since then, I'm trying to remember when that story originated. I think it's older than we think it is, I believe. It kind of starts to share elbow room with the stories of the underworld. So I don't know how old it is. I think it might even be as old as the 80s. But that lake kind of reminds me of it, because, man, what else could you think that is? Especially at the bottom of that, not quite a chasm, but at the bottom of that pit, to have a burning red-hot lake. That I can't imagine much else that you would have a relation to in your mind than a Hole to Hell. So I wonder if I should actually remember this location specifically and see if was any talk in the area about folklore of it being a Hole to Hell, because that would definitely be significant.
And today I want to talk about lakes that explode. There are only 3 lakes like this in the world that we know of. The largest one is called Lake Kivu. It's one of the African Great Lakes located along this rift valley. This is where the continent is ripping apart, causing a lot of volcanic activity. One reason that Lake Kivu is so dangerous is its close proximity to one of Africa's most dangerous and active volcanoes, Nyiragonga. This lake is a ticking time bomb, and while it hasn't exploded in recent memory, 2 other lakes like it have. Lake Nyos is a crater lake across the continent of Africa in Cameroon. In the evening of 1986, after a landslide, Lake Nyos released an enormous cloud of carbon dioxide gas. The gas was moving at 30 miles an hour as it headed to the local villages. Over 1,700 people suffocated in their sleep, while some 3,500 livestock perished. The scientific phenomenon that killed all these people is called a limnic eruption, and Lake Kivu is poised to do even worse damage. The science of these lakes always begins with the magma that's close beneath the surface. Magma releases huge volumes of carbon dioxide, which end up filtering into the lake. The CO2 is dissolved in the cold water at the bottom of the lake, and because the water is stratified and rarely gets rotation throughout the seasons, the CO2 just builds up. Under pressure, it's like a giant can of soda with too much fizz that's been shaken before opening it. At this point, it's a ticking time bomb that could be set off by something like an earthquake or a volcanic eruption. And we call these exploding lakes for a reason, because when they pop, it can send a tidal wave to the shore, followed by the silent, invisible, thick cloud of CO2 gas. The lakes do have preventative measures in place to relieve the pressure of the gas. And because Lake Kivu is so much bigger and so deep, they're actually using the gas to create electricity for the country of Rwanda. Unfortunately, in May of this year, the Nyiragonga volcano located near Lake Kivu erupted, which despite preventative measures means that the lake could explode at any time. 10 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month. We're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and today I want to talk about the hurricanes at the Great Lakes. This is a real satellite image of so-called Hurricane Huron that formed in September of 1996. The storm formed over the warm waters of Lake Huron and sustained for 4 days before dissipating. It had a lot of classic hurricane features, including the eye at the center of the storm, which was 20 miles across. It also stretched from Minnesota to the East Coast, covering some 300 miles of land and water. The waves on Lake Huron were 35 feet high, and the winds maxed out at 75 miles an hour. However, despite all these similarities, it's not technically a hurricane since it didn't sustain those high winds. But we still called it a hurricane because of lack of another word for a storm like this. The closest term is probably a mid-latitude cyclone. Whatever you want to call it, it was a weather anomaly that's still studied to this day. But it wasn't the first nor the most deadly so-called hurricane in Great Lakes history. That title goes to the storm of 1913. History will remember this storm as the White Hurricane, which was the worst storm in recorded human history on the Great Lakes. For 3 days in November, this storm raged over 4 of the Great Lakes. It was a combination of blizzard conditions with some real hurricane force winds at 90 miles per hour. Due to whiteout conditions and massive accumulations of ice, 19 ships were stranded and 19 were lost forever. An estimated 250 lives were lost. Adjusted for inflation, this November gale cost up to $130 million. History will remember them as hurricanes. 5 out of 10 spookies.
The Great Lakes is another topic that I have really considered covering recently. I'd like to be able to visit it to be able to kind of understand it better. I really found that, I found out very quickly within the first season that going to a location, especially if people say that it's haunted or have other folklore about it, going to a location really makes a huge difference in understanding why people have believed that for as long as they have, be it a few years, be it several centuries, or sometimes longer. I remember that specifically with Bobby Mackey's. Bobby Mackey's, that was in, I think that was the finale episodes of season 1. I had, of course, grown up seeing the episodes about it, everybody talking about it. I remember the day that I saw the first Ghost Adventures episode going there. And in every show, people were talking about how they would see figures and all kinds of other chaos. And when I visited in person, I realized that in all of the footage that I had grown up seeing, especially when they are interviewing any employees there, they always interview them in front of the main bar, which is what you see when you immediately go in. Well, not anymore. It was demolished almost a year ago. I have an update episode about it and the demolition and how it's affected the area. I'm hoping to be able to post that one soon with some video elements. But anyway, the front bar is the first thing that you see when you go in. And so that is usually where they had their interviews, because it's also close to the merch counter that has the I partied with the ghosts at Bobby Mackey shirts and all that kind of a thing. So growing up, I thought that that strip of bar and maybe the room at the end was it. That was the entire building. So, not that I thought that nothing was going on, but when I went there in person and saw the full dance hall and banquet hall, essentially, that was behind the bar, I suddenly kind of understood why people were kind of seeing these shadowy, shifting figures at the end of the room. It was so big, and there were some kind of creepy indoor windows and doorways that I really, all of a sudden, was not surprised that you would see something way at the end of this long, long hall, especially since there really weren't, I think there were like 3 really foggy windows at the end of the banquet hall. And so when cars came driving around the bend up to Bobby Mackey's, the headlights would provide this really dim light because the windows were so foggy. But I feel like that's kind of a prime way to create some spooky shadows and spooky feelings. So going back to the Great Lakes, I have always considered it, but I really would like to actually visit in order to understand. I know people who have been are always like, you have no idea how big it is. It really truly looks like a sea. And I spent a good amount of my life by the ocean. So I would like to witness it, because there's a ton of folklore about it. There's a whole lot of hauntings, some of which we just heard about in her episode about the storms and the ships that went down in it. It's just kind of a fascinating concept, almost a pocket ocean, a pocket freshwater ocean, and the folklore around that. I had also researched some lighthouse stuff, so potentially looking into the lighthouses around the Great Lakes would also be interesting.
Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month. We're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and today I want to talk about a segment of the Amazon River that boils, and no one really knows why. Located in Peru, this boiling tributary of the Amazon River stretches for 4 miles in the middle of the jungle. Other names for the river are the Shanai Tempishka or La Bomba. The hottest temperatures of the river can reach 212 degrees Fahrenheit. If you were to put your hand in, you would get 2nd to 3rd degree burns. In fact, small animals, reptiles, and amphibians frequently fall in and they're boiled alive. One of the many curious things about the river is it starts off as a cold stream, heats up, and then it cools down slightly deep into the night. This natural phenomenon is still somewhat of a mystery to scientists, and while there's workable theories, no one truly knows why the river is boiling. There are no volcanoes that people know of in the area, and there's no geothermal vents. One hypothesis is called geothermal gradient, where the water is being pumped through the crust close to the mantle and heating up. However, at these temperatures, the water would have to be going pretty deep down and at a very fast rate. All other boiling rivers that we know of have a volcanic source, and this much water at such high temperatures requires an incredible amount of heat or energy. According to oral traditions of the local people, the boiling river is a place of tremendous spiritual power. Only the most powerful shamans go here because all other people are afraid of the spirits. 7 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month, where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. And today I want to talk about Jacob's Well, an infamous diving spot that has claimed at least 8 lives. Jacob's Well is actually an artesian spring just outside of Austin, Texas. The cool waters of the spring attract recreation as a relief to the hot Texas summers. The opening of Jacob's Well is actually a sinkhole that leads into a vast labyrinth of caves beneath the water. The entirety of the cave is not explored, but there are difficult passages such as the birth canal, which is only 15 inches wide. This is just part of the reason why this cave system has a reputation for being the most dangerous in the world. 2 of the most infamous deaths here occurred in 1979 when 2 Texan men went diving late at night. At some points during their dive, some 140 feet below the surface, they would have had to remove their oxygen tanks just to fit through some of the narrow crevices. Whether they kicked up silt and panicked or got caught in the tight crevices of Jacob's Well, we will never know. One body was recovered over a year later in 1981. However, it wasn't until 20 years later that the second body was found, which means that people were enjoying their cool summer dip at Jacob's Well for 20 years within 100 feet or so of human remains. Diving here is now incredibly restricted, and just like many other dangerous cave diving sites, it includes a sign like this: 9 out of 10 spookies.
Jacob's Well. Jacob's Well is an interesting one. There are a few dive spots that are incredibly deadly, but I'm a little shocked that this one even remained open to the public, but I don't know if there was any particularly recent incidences that occurred there. I don't know. I'd have to look that up, but cave diving in particular is a special kind of... I'll just say that I have no interest in doing that kind of thing. I really have no interest in diving. I have thalassophobia pretty bad, so that will not be something. But I've heard people talk about those kinds of hobbies like the person doing it is stupid for it, but I don't know, that's easy to say, as someone that's not interested in it, but I don't know, humans have always had a drive to have to prove what we can do and achieve and to conquer whatever we come across, which, yeah, I guess that has its own problems for sure, and it's clearly led to more than a few deaths. But yeah, cave diving I know is particularly deadly with cave-ins, cooking up silt, what is it, oxygen narcosis, no, not narcosis, CO2 poisoning, getting the bends, which if you go deep enough, that really does become kind of its own issue. I don't know. When I think about it, I don't know if I've ever really considered covering it myself, because I'm kind of covering folklore, ghost stories, monsters, things that we kind of have to push to understand or to try to figure out. So when it comes to tragedies like that, there's really nothing that I can say about it. That's another thing. I don't really like to cover any topic or area unless I have either found more information that isn't often talked about, or I feel like I really have something to add. Because there's a million videos out there about Bobby Mackey's, but I chose to do it because the source material and the information I had access to is not frequently sourced and is not frequently talked about or discussed on those videos. So I felt like I was actually bringing something to the table. That, and I was able to actually visit it. So I was able to kind of give my own perspective on being there and what that was like. I also was able to interview a ghost hunter who had frequently been there. So I felt like there was stuff to provide. But when it comes to things like Jacob's Well that are just tragedies and they're horrible and they're horrifying, I don't really feel a particular need to point to that tragedy over and over and over again. Though, I mean, something can be learned from it for sure. You can definitely learn from those tragedies and the risks involved. But I don't feel like I'm providing anything. If there was stories about people seeing divers or seeing things, experiencing things in the area, that's a different story, because that's something to kind of push to get to the bottom of, or to figure out why are people having those experiences in that area. But as it stands now, just not potentially a topic for me in the future, but I think she covered it pretty well, especially for a kind of crash course,
Look at El Ojo, or the eye in English. This strange natural phenomenon is located in the swampy marshes of Argentina near Buenos Aires. What makes this such a strange lake formation is its consistent movement. We have Google Earth images going back until 2003, so we've been tracking it for at least 20 years. When it was first discovered, people immediately jumped to extraterrestrial or paranormal explanations. However, this phenomenon can be explained by science because that is a floating island. And unfortunately, no, it's not an island that's carried on the back of a giant tortoise. But to be fair, floating islands occur in nature very rarely. This usually only occurs on shorelines that are very soft, so in marshes and swamplands. After breaking off from the shoreline, these islands are held together through roots, plants, and sometimes even trees, such as this beautiful example of an island in Italy. Over time, with enough continual movement, these islands will bump along the shoreline, eventually creating a perfect circle. But don't mix up natural floating islands with man-made floating islands such as these examples in India, or the famous man-made islands of Lake Titicaca. Despite the fact that we've debunked alien involvement, I still think the movement of this island is pretty creepy. 4 out of 10 spookies.
Those I think would be particularly interesting to look into, since there seems to be a kind of cultural belief system around those islands. And I know once you get into that territory that pools have a long history of being perceived as portals, especially locations that have clearer water, or a pond or a small lake like that is perfectly round. Think about fairy rings, mushroom rings, fairy rings. It's the same kind of thing. When people see that kind of symmetry out in the world, we naturally think that something intelligent or supernatural must have had something to do with it, because I know people say it, though I've seen examples of like nature doesn't make straight lines, that kind of a thing. Of nature doesn't tend to like to make anything that is perfectly straight, perfectly round, perfectly anything. So when we see something like that, I don't think people are inclined to believe that they are naturally occurring. So I wouldn't be surprised that if you dug a little bit, that there would be those perceptions of portals to either another world, the underworld, that kind of a thing. I know that is true of cenotes down in Mexico, South America, that cenotes are underwater lakes that are in caves, kind of, that are hidden by the jungle. So there's just, especially if you look overhead, it's jungle, 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 and then this, almost like someone took a hole punch into the rock. And then you have a lake going down there that cenotes are frequently almost borderline forbidden to go to, because there's cultural belief that they have to do with the underworld. And that was true of the indigenous populations there as well, though I won't go too much more into that since I haven't done the true research for it yet. But I actually do need to swap my camera battery, so I'm going to play the next one and we'll let that play.
Yes, hello. It's Spooky Lake Month. We're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and today I want to talk about bioluminescent bays, which are incredibly rare. There are only about 5 consistently bioluminescent bays in the world. One of the most famous of these bays is located in Puerto Rico. It's called Mosquito Bay, and it's located on the smaller island of Vieques. Up until 2003, the U.S. military used the island as a naval base, which meant that the bay was pretty untouched. And therefore, the bioluminescent dinoflagellates that live here were able to thrive. I just have to say the name Mosquito Bay is a bit of a misnomer because it's not named after blood-sucking demons, but in fact after a very cool pirate. He was known as something of a Robin Hood character because he gave money to the poor, but he used to hide his ship El Mosquito in the bay. The shape of the bay with such a small entrance is the reason that microorganisms are able to thrive here. This is the largest concentration of these critters on the planet, with some 700,000 of them per gallon. They're incredibly tiny, and you can fit 3 of them on the head of a pin. The ecosystems they depend on are very delicate. They live in almost exclusively tropic climates. Scientists don't know precisely how dinoflagellates bioluminesce, but they believe it's a defense mechanism. They light up because of movement, so it might be to escape from predators. These critters can occasionally be found in other parts of the world, such as California, New Jersey, or Australia. Unfortunately, a lot of times they come with the red tide. This can be hazardous to humans and absolutely toxic for marine ecosystems. The tide might be red in the morning and bioluminescent at night. I like to imagine pirates seeing bioluminescence with no scientific context. 5 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and today we have to talk about a lake that's in Antarctica. One of the strangest places in the world is the freshwater lake that's trapped 2 miles beneath the ice near the South Pole. Of all of the subglacial lakes in Antarctica, Lake Vostok is the largest. It has a similar water volume to that of Lake Ontario, but it's been cut off from sunlight and the Earth's atmosphere for 15 to 25 million years. Prior to the 1900s, no scientist would have ever considered that a freshwater lake could exist beneath 2 miles of ice. However, the pressure from the ice sheet is contributing to keeping the lake liquid despite being so intensely cold. It's also suspected that the lake formed in a rift valley prior to Antarctica being covered in ice. So it's possible that there's a geothermal vent that continues to warm the lake today. The lake has always been shrouded in a bit of mystery because it was initially discovered by Russian scientists in the 1960s. Vostok Station is one of the most remote places on Earth, and Russia has had almost exclusive control over the research that's been done at this lake. It wasn't until 1990 that they decided to drill a borehole down to Lake Vostok. Little did they know it would take them 20 years. This ended up being the largest core sample ever taken, some 12,400 feet of ice. It wasn't until 2013 that they were able to reach the lake, and no one really knew what to expect. As they got closer to the surface of Lake Vostok, scientists were shocked to discover microbes frozen in the ice. Breaking through to the surface of the lake turned out to be incredibly complex because of the sheer amount of pressure of the ice on the water. When they actually broke through, water from Lake Vostok rushed up into the borehole and froze. They were able to take samples from the frozen lake water by 2015. So far, some 3,500 species of microorganisms have been discovered in the ice, and they plan to send a probe down in the near future. What can live in Lake Vostok will give us clues to potential life on other planets. I don't know. I think it's a little too close to the plot of The Thing. 7 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello. It's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted.
Yeah, so The Thing definitely comes to mind if you're finding frozen organisms that far deep. But remember what I said about the borehole going down so far that they could hear the souls of the damned screaming? Yeah, that's what I meant. That is the, because they just take those ice cores. So you're not, I think as a kid when I heard that urban legend, I was thinking of it like how you dig a hole at the beach or, not to be morbid, a grave, like almost a large man-made hole, but no, it's only a couple inches across in order to just get samples of that ice. So I remember the urban legend actually had an uptick when that borehole happened, because they were able to say this is the longest sample that we've taken. This is the deepest hole that we've ever done. And so it saw a resurgence in the urban legend because it kind of begged the question of, has mankind done it again? Have we dug too deep? So that incident specifically contributed to that urban legend having a revival, and it started to make its way around a lot more. But yeah, for a second I was a little bit nervous about an underwater lake at that point under a glacier, because I know there's another video she does where people tried to dive into it, which I truly cannot think of a worse situation to be in, but we'll have to wait to see about that one.
Of haunted hydrology, and today we have to talk about the deadly tide pools in Hawaii. I just have to say, the islands have all sorts of deadly hydrology, such as this blowhole where people have actually died, or the Boiling Pots River where even more people have died. And then there's Kivu Falls where 5 people died in a 5-year span. But arguably the most dangerous and deadly place in all of Hawaii is the Queen's Bath tide pools in Kauai. The oldest of the main Hawaiian islands, Kauai is some 5 million years old. All of the islands here were formed through a volcanic hotspot. However, on Kauai, you can see how the erosion has impacted the volcanic rock. This is also apparent on the shoreline where Queen's Bath is located. Just to clarify, there are multiple tide pools along this shoreline. This one is technically Queen's Bath. The lower one is only known as the Pool of Death. To some tourists, Queen's Bath might seem like the idyllic place to swim. However, a natural phenomenon called a sneaker wave can catch people by surprise even during low tide. Over 30 people have died here in recent memory. Many of their bodies are swept to sea, never to be seen again. And the nearby Pool of Death is worse. Even if you have no intention of swimming, the Queen's Bath is a dangerous place to be caught by surprise. Such as this person who's standing on the edge of the Pool of Death when he's caught unaware by an intense wave and dragged off of the rocks. It's not worth risking your life. 9 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. And today I want to talk about the Salton Sea. This enormous body of water is shallow, endorheic, and 25% saltier than the ocean. Endorheic means that there's no outlet for the water besides evaporation, which leaves the salt behind. It's currently the largest body of water in California, but it was created through a man-made accident. In the year 1900, they began to construct irrigation channels that diverted the water from the Colorado River to agriculture in the Imperial Valley. But prior to human intervention, this valley had a history of filling with floodwater from the Colorado River. For thousands of years, this area would transition from dry desert to the basin of ancient Lake Kauai. As it would dry and fill, the indigenous people here would come to depend on it, but it finally disappeared for the last time in the 1400s. In 1905, floodwaters broke through the newly constructed irrigation channels. For 2 years, the entirety of the Colorado River flooded the Imperial Valley, creating the modern-day Salton Sea. People capitalized on the accident, and agriculture has flourished here for over 100 years. In the 1950s and 60s, the Salton Sea was a popular tourist destination for millions of people. Communities grew with hotels, resorts, and vacation homes. But by the 1970s, the water was already becoming toxic and contaminated. Farming runoff meant the lake was absorbing pesticides, DDT, and other toxins. Combined with 120-degree summer heat, fish and wildlife began to die off. Today, the beaches are covered in fish bones, and the smell is so intensely bad that it can make people's eyes water. What's left behind are ghost towns and a salty landscape covered in bones and death. By the year 2030, a third of the water will have disappeared, and it's leaving behind something even more terrifying. All of the toxins in the water are left behind by evaporation to dry into the ground, waiting to be picked up by the wind. This is already making thousands of people sick, and it's only going to get worse. Rotting ghost towns and toxic dust. 8 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and today I want to talk about this crater lake in Estonia that has a pretty eerie origin story. Estonia is a country in northern Europe that borders the Gulf of Finland and the Baltic Sea. The crater is located on Saaremaa, the largest island in Estonia. However, this is the largest crater of 9 craters that were created by the same meteor impact. This event happened some 3,500 years ago, and it's the most recent time in history that a giant meteorite has hit a densely populated area. The impact occurred around the Bronze Age, and it not only left traces on the land, but also on the folklore of this region. This would have been one of the few meteorite impacts that humans actually witnessed on the planet. For hundreds of years, the origin of the crater was a mystery, and early scientists believed it might be volcanic or from karst geology. It wasn't until 1937 that the impact theory was accepted. The meteor would have been traveling at some 35,000 miles per hour, and it fragmented as it entered the atmosphere. The energy at the site of impact would have been equivalent to a nuclear bomb greater than that of Hiroshima. The blast would have incinerated 4 miles of vegetation, and miles more would burn. Because of the type of rock it impacted, what followed was a superheated cloud of magnesium gas. A 130-mile radius around the island would have heard the sonic boom. It It's highly likely that people died during the event, and the area is still considered sacred today. Archaeologists have unearthed evidence of a stone wall that would have been built around the entirety of the crater during the Iron Age, and some believe the wall would have served as a stronghold to an ancient cult settlement. There was also an unusual number of animal bones found near the crater, possibly pointing at ritual sacrifice. The only curious thing is that the bones date back to the 1600s, long after the church forbade such rituals. Some archaeologists also believe it's possible that there's undiscovered remains at the bottom of the lake. The Kali crater deserves 6 out of 10 spookies.
Man, I have so many thoughts about that lake. That would be the kind of thing that I would want to look into, because it sounds like it really affected the culture and even the behavior of how they treated that area from that impact. Now, it would be, if you can hear jingling, that is my cat's collar, so just tune that out. It would be really easy, I think, for any religions in the area to be able to point to this as an act of God, so to speak, or a divine punishment, or some kind of mythological event. And so, especially it having happened so long ago, I'm not surprised at all to hear that there was potentially animal sacrifice going on. Because if you thought that what happened in the area was the result of some kind of deity, wouldn't you want to make it to placate this deity or apologize or try to keep it happy? So I really doubt that, even though she mentioned that the church outlawed animal sacrifice, I really doubt that would have actually stopped that from happening, especially the local towns in the local area that have passed on that folklore, which I'm sure evolved over time, that shifted and changed. And when I was listening to it, I couldn't help but think about if you lived at that time. And no, they didn't have the same studies or science that we did, but the idea of just being in town and then all of a sudden this massive area is just gone. What little trade routes there were, just gone. Anyone, and there would be, I can't imagine there would be a ton of witnesses, though it sounds like it was a crazy, loud, and probably visually stunning event. If there were witnesses to it, the only thing that they would be able to tell the other cities in the area and towns is that it was a bright light that smote the earth, that destroyed an entire culture of people. So it would only feed that kind of religious fear of what happened, since there was really no other alternative for why it happened or what exactly happened. And we see time and time and again in history that if you don't have that kind of science, that people will have to fill the gaps in order to kind of make themselves feel better or make themselves feel like they have more control. Because even if they can say that it's a deity, that a deity or a god or a mythical beast did this, even though they don't have the power or the ability to prevent that from happening or to fight a god, it is still an explanation. It is still something to do something with the information of that. So if you know what deity did that, then you can follow through with the sacrificial requirements, or you would have some kind of instruction for how to make that god happy. And so then you feel like you have a chance to survive the next time that something like this might happen, or prevent it from happening in the first place next time. So I'm sure that really, really impacted the area, though it was so old that it sounds like this happened quite a bit before written records. So I would be curious to hear what the folklore is in the area as recently as written records happened, but we would have to read that with the understanding that those almost certainly evolved over time before it was recorded. But I think that is about all the time that I have for today. Though we've been recording for, I don't know, about like an hour 15 and an hour and a half. And you know what? I think we've made a decent amount of progress. We've got more than half of the moon. But yeah, this should give you an idea for how long doing this kind of embroidery takes. I have other embroidery pieces on my website, and there are a few of those that took upwards of 60 hours, and I have a project in the works that will probably take hundreds of hours. So I will reserve this project for doing live streams, and I think I quite liked watching some of my favorite stuff and having some commentary on it. I'm not an expert by any means, but it's just kind of fun to talk about and kind of a cozy activity to do that's not super intense. So if you liked it, you can always subscribe and come back. And you can listen to my show in the meantime. It's wherever you get your podcasts, except for Spotify. I don't endorse what Spotify's been up to, but you can also listen on the website at backawayslowlypodcast.com. So thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you next time.